Welcome to BeFM Drama, where we turn great works of English literature into gripping radio. My name is Joshua Cornwell, and I'm the host and writer of this program. Today we're bringing you part 4 in a 5-part adaptation of The Stockbroker's Clerk, a classic Sherlock Holmes mystery by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. In this story, a young clerk named Hall Pycroft has been persuaded to turn down a good job at a reputable London trading company in order to accept work at a much higher salary for a mysterious business called the Franco-Midland Hardware Company Limited, based in Birmingham. The job was offered to Pycroft by a man calling himself Mr. Pinner, and Pycroft was told that Pinner's brother would be his manager in Birmingham. When Pycroft finally arrived at the company offices, he found things were not as they seemed, and his suspicions reached a fever pitch when he saw his employer's gold-filled tooth and suddenly realized that the Pinner brothers were in fact one and the same man, and that Pycroft was the target of some trick, the purpose of which he could hardly guess at. Shocked by what he'd learned, Pycroft sought the assistance of the legendary detective Sherlock Holmes. As we rejoin the story, Holmes and Dr. Watson have agreed to return to Birmingham with Pycroft in order to investigate this mysterious Mr. Pinner and his strange company. By 7 o'clock that evening, the three of us were walking down Corporation Street toward the offices of the Franco-Midland Trading Company Limited. We discussed our plan of action as we made our way.
It is no use our arriving before the arranged meeting time. I'm certain that Pinner is only in the office when he goes there to meet with me. Otherwise, the place is completely deserted. I'm telling you, there's something awfully odd about Franco-Midland Hardware.
The fact that he's never in this so-called office is certainly suggestive.
Suddenly, Pycroft drew in a sharp, excited breath and pointed with his finger across the street towards a figure moving through the steady traffic of pedestrians.
By Jove, I told you so. That's Pinner walking ahead of us, right over there.
The man he'd pointed out was a smallish, dark-featured, well-dressed man who was walking very quickly along the other side of the road. As we watched him, he noticed a boy who was shouting out the latest headlines and selling copies of the evening papers on our side of the street. Pinner ran straight over to him, dodging cabs, buses, and horses and cursing drivers. He bought a newspaper from the boy, and, clutching it in a white-knuckled grip, he vanished down a side alley.
There he goes. That's the passageway that leads to the company's offices. Come with me. I'll lead you to him, and we'll get this business sorted out as smoothly as possible.
Following Pycroft's lead, we climbed up 5 flights of stairs and finally found ourselves outside a half-open door, at which Pycroft knocked gently. A man's voice called us in, and we entered the bare, unfurnished rooms that Hall Pycroft had described to us on the train up from London. At the single table sat the man we had seen in the street, with his evening paper spread out open in front of him. When he looked up at us, it seemed to me that I had never looked upon such a grief-stricken, miserable face. No, looking closer, it seemed to go beyond mere grief, to a horror of nightmarish, traumatic loss, of the kind that comes few times to a person in their lifetime. His brows glistened with sweat. His cheeks were the dull, dead white of a fish's belly, and his eyes were wild and staring. He looked at his clerk as if he hardly recognized him, and I could see by Pycroft's astonished face that this was by no means the usual appearance of his employer.
You look ill, Mr. Pinner.
Yes, I'm not very well.
The man made an obvious effort to pull himself back together and licked his dry lips before he spoke.
Who are these gentlemen you have brought with you?
One is Mr. Harris of Bermondsey, and the other is Mr. Price of Birmingham. They are friends of mine and gentlemen with experience, but they have been out of work for some time, and they hope that perhaps you might find an opening for them as employees in our company.
Pinner gave a ghastly, false smile.
Very possibly, very possibly. Yes, I have no doubt that we shall be able to do something for you. What is your particular line of work, Mr. Harris?
I am an accountant.
Ah, yes. We shall need something of that sort. And you, Mr. Price?
Oh, I'm a clerk, sir.
I have every hope that the company might accommodate you. I'll let you know about it as soon as I've made a determination. And now I beg that you all go. For God's sake, leave me to myself.
These last words seemed to shoot out of him as if the control with which he had kept himself from breaking down had suddenly given way under the enormous strain and burst asunder. Holmes and I glanced at each other, and Hall Pycroft took a step towards the table.
You forget, Mr. Pinner, that I'm here by appointment. I was to receive some instruction from you about the work you wish me to assign me.
Certainly, Mr. Pycroft, certainly.
Pinner's voice was suddenly calm.
You may wait here a moment. There's no reason why your friends should not wait with you as well. I'll be entirely at your service in 3 minutes. Please forgive the interruption and be patient.
Pinner rose with a very courteous air and, bowing to us, passed out through a door at the far end of the room, which he closed behind him. Holmes turned to look at us and spoke in a stage whisper.
What now? Is he giving us the slip?
Impossible.
How so?
Because that door leads into an inner room.
There is no exit?
None.
Is it furnished?
It was empty yesterday.
Then what on earth can he be doing? There's something I don't understand in this matter. If ever a man was 3 parts mad with terror, that man's name is Pinner. What can have put him in such a state?
Perhaps he suspects that we are detectives.
That's it.
Holmes shook his head.
He did not turn pale when he saw us. He was pale when he entered the room. It is just possible that...
His words were interrupted by a sharp banging noise from the direction of the inner door.
What the deuce is he knocking at his own door for?
Again and again came the rat-tat-tat knocking on the door. We all gazed expectantly at it, wondering if it would open. Suddenly I saw Holmes's face turn rigid, and he leaned forward with sudden, intense excitement and alarm. Then suddenly there came a low, gurgling, gargling sound and a brisk drumming on the woodwork. Holmes leapt up frantically and rushed across the room and pushed at the door. It was locked on the inside.
Together, not a moment to lose. We must break down the door.
We threw ourselves upon the door with all our weight. One hinge snapped, then the other, and the door came off with a crash. Rushing over it, we found ourselves in the inner room. It was empty, but our confusion lasted only an instant. At one corner of the little room, there was a second door. Holmes sprang to it and pulled it open. Pinner's coat and waistcoat were lying on the floor, and from a hook behind the door, hanging from his own suspenders, was the managing director of the Franco-Midland Hardware Company himself. His knees were drawn up, and his head held at a dreadful angle to his body. It had been the clatter of his heels against the door that had made the noise that had so startled us. In an instant, I had grabbed Pinner around the waist and held him up while Holmes and Pycroft undid the suspenders. Then we carried him to the other room, where he lay with a clay-colored face, puffing his purple lips in and out with every breath, a dreadful wreck of the man he had been but 5 minutes before. Holmes turned to me with alarm in his eyes.
What do you think of him, Watson?
I stooped down and carefully examined the man. His pulse was feeble and intermittent, but his breathing grew longer and more stable, and his eyelids were quivering with the first signs of consciousness. Good Lord, that was close. It's been a touch-and-go thing, but he'll live. Just open that window for some fresh air and hand me that carafe of water. I undid Pinner's collar, poured the cold water over his face, and raised and lowered his arms until he drew a long, natural breath. There. It's only a question of time now. Holmes stood by the table with his hands deep in his trouser pockets and his chin upon his breast.
I suppose we ought to call the police in now, and yet I confess I'd like to give them a complete picture of the case when they come.
With that, we've come to the end of part 4 in our 5-part adaptation of the Stockbroker's Clerk. Mr. Pinner, the mysterious manager of the Franco-Midland Hardware Company in Birmingham, has just made an attempt on his own life, leaving Holmes, Watson, and Mr. Pycroft with no understanding of what might have happened to lead to such drastic action. Why was Pycroft tricked into turning down work in London to come to Birmingham? Why did Mr. Pinner pose as his own brother? What has happened to reduce Pinner to such a state of despair and induce him to make an attempt on his own life? Find out tomorrow evening in the final climactic episode of the Stockbroker's Clerk here on BeFM Drama. From our studio in Busan, this is your host, Joshua Cornwell.